Hey guys, tonight we begin with a dinner table unlike any other. No candles, no tablecloth, no forks. Just you, a tin of mystery stew, a brick-hard biscuit, and the gentle background melody of distant artillery fire. Welcome to the trenches of World War I, a place where the mud is endless, the rats are fearless, and the food. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And leave a comment to let me know where you're listening from and what time it is there. I always find it fascinating to know who's drifting off with me on this sleepy little journey from across the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's gently slide into tonight's adventure. You wake up in a puddle of nameless mud, cradled by the soggy walls of a trench. The sky is the color of cold oatmeal, and dampness seeps through every layer of clothing, clinging to your skin like winter's whisper. A rat scurries across your shoulder. It isn't afraid of you. It seems to be weighing whether to share your breakfast ration. You push yourself upright, stomach rumbling. Hungry, not the maybe I'll get lunch later kind of hungry, but the kind that has you eyeing your boot leather and wondering if it does taste like old belt, as rumored. Your supply bag slumps beside you. You open it with low hopes and even lower expectations. Inside, a cold tin can, faded letters spelling out, Maconochie stew. It sounds like the name of a minor Scottish lord, but in reality it's a canned meat and vegetable horror that has conquered more stomachs than battles ever could. You crack it open. A small fart hisses like the final breath of something long forgotten. Inside, a brown-orange sludge shimmers faintly in the dim light, with chunks of meat, potato, perhaps the souls of other doomed dinners. The smell, a mournful symphony of beans, salt, metal, and the ghosts of better meals. You take a spoonful. It's not good, but at least it doesn't immediately make you go blind, which by trench standards is a culinary win. A fellow soldier groans beside you. Even the cat wouldn't sniff this yesterday. You glance over seriously. There was a cat? I thought the rats ate them all. Moments later, a weary officer hands you dessert. A hardtack biscuit. The military's cruel joke in food form. You've heard the legends. One old soldier said he used one to hammer a nail. Another claimed it took 30 minutes soaking in tea before he dared bite it. You knock it against your helmet. Clonk, clonk. Yep, straight from the gravel family. You dip it into your mug of hot brown water, generously called tea. Honestly, it resembles something used to rinse out cans. Still, you persist. 10 minutes later, the biscuit's edge softens slightly. You bite in. And a tooth gives a very unfriendly crack. You pause. Life choices are re-evaluated. And then, like a miracle, a cheerful American soldier strolls past, whistling as if the war were just a distant rumor. He flashes a smile and holds out a glimmering silver-wrapped Hershey's chocolate bar, shining like hope in foil. Want a trade? I'll take your biscuit. You don't hesitate. You hand over your ration with both hands and accept the sacred offering. As the sweetness melts across your tongue, something in you warms, lightens, almost feels human again. The shells still fall, the mud still clings, the rat is still eyeing your bag. But you feel alive for a brief moment amid war, chocolate, and the bitter comedy of survival. And if you make it through tonight, one thing is sure. Tomorrow, no matter what, you're trading for another one. The sky hasn't quite brightened. Or maybe it has, but the sun refuses to show up. Everything is cloaked in a pale grey, like an old blanket accidentally washed with a pot of purple ink. The trench is slick, freezing, and every movement makes your wet clothes whisper like they're groaning from exhaustion. You stretch and reach for your tin cup. That multi-purpose miracle used for eating, drinking, cooking, or, in a pinch, self-defense. There's still some cold water inside, but that's okay. You have a secret. A tea bag, tattered, wrinkled, reused too many times to count. But it still has a scent. You carefully pour the water into a second tin, place it over a tiny flame, coaxed into life with scraps of wood, fabric, and faith. The flame doesn't so much burn as struggle. Wartime fire is tired too. You drop the tea bag in when the water starts to boil, or at least bubble out of pure exhaustion. A light aroma rises. It doesn't smell like tea from home, but it doesn't smell like boots either. That's enough. You sip a little. The warm liquid slides down your throat, soothes the cold that's settled into your bones. It's just tinted water. No sugar, no milk, no flavor, but somehow it carries a strange power. It says it's not time to fall apart yet. A soldier next to you is doing something similar. He's making coffee. He's mixing cold water with coffee grounds and stirring with a dirt-smudged stick. When you ask what it tastes like, he shrugs. Bitter as the draft, notice. Still, you both sit in silence, sip tea, slurp coffee. There's no need to speak. The faint warmth of that drink is a fragile thread tying you both to your humanity. There are rumors from the rear lines, stories of military tea stations. They say there's real hot water, sometimes even sweetened condensed milk. It sounds like fantasy. Some claim to have seen it, others dream, but anyone who's tasted sweet tea in the middle of war remembers it forever. Not because it was delicious, but it made them cry. You have no sugar, no milk, but you have a warm cup, a biscuit as hard as church roof tiles, and a brief moment of silence with no gunfire. That is breakfast. Across the trench, the Germans are doing the same, thick, bitter black coffee brewed in a battered pot. Once, during a ceasefire to retrieve the wounded, a German soldier slipped you a sugar cube. You've kept it in your jacket pocket ever since, a lucky charm. You haven't used it yet. You're saving it for something special. Maybe a day with real bread. Or peace. Many soldiers carry peppermints, little tea pouches wrapped in handkerchiefs from home, or scraps of paper with "how to brew it right" scribbled in a familiar hand. These things don't seem like much, but make the war bearable. You sit there, hands cupped around your tin. The steam warms your nose and cheeks. His coffee is as thick as ink. Yours tastes like memory. In the distance, artillery rumbles like a tired sky. No one flinches. Breakfast continues. Someone begins to whistle. The tune is unclear. It could be a ballroom melody, maybe a lullaby. A call to a world with no bombs. You glance into your cup. The tea has gone cold, but something inside you stays warm, not because of the drink, but because someone is sitting beside you, also sipping, also silent, also trying to survive, one sip at a time. And as you rise, pull your coat tight, and prepare to climb out of the trench, you carry no new weapon, no fresh orders. You have something else. The memory of a morning when hot tea was the only thing holding you to the world. Your stomach starts to rumble again. Hot tea might soothe the soul, but doesn't fill the void between your ribs and spine. The sky remains grim, and the wind slithers through the trenches like winter playing a cruel joke with no punchline. You reach into your kit, fingers brushing against something cold, complex, and familiarly square. No need to look. It's a tin of Makanochi stew, the official meal of the British soldier, lovingly canned with maximum disappointment. You sigh. The name sounds like a jolly Scottish gentleman, but what's inside is culinary despair with government approval. Some call it stew. Others call it sanctioned taste bud abuse. You call it this again? You pop the lid with your old trench knife. A soft bit escapes, like the tin is trying to hold back emotion. Inside is a murky orange-brown sludge, dotted with floating lumps that might be meat, potatoes, or the ghosts of meals past. The smell hits immediately, a mix of beans, salt, metal, and mild regret. You hold it up to a comrade and ask, just to be sure, "This is beef, right?" He squints, nose wrinkling. Could be beef, could be cat. Definitely been dead a while. You chuckle dryly and take a bite. First spoonful, a mushy cube of potato, aggressively salty, lacking all other ambition. Second spoonful, a chewy chunk that might be a carrot. Third spoonful. You decide not to speculate. They say that when this was first invented, it was meant to boost troop morale, a hot, convenient, no-fuss meal for cold days and tired hands. But to you it feels like a can of memories boiled into oblivion. Nobody wants to remember what's in there. Another soldier opens his tin. It's identical to yours, but with a congealed layer of white-grey fat floating on top like candle wax. He pokes it with a finger and asks, "Think I could use this to shine my boots?" You shrug. Just don't shine your pride with it. Truthfully, makanoki isn't downright awful when appropriately heated, which means it is not burned and is not still icy in the middle. It can, in theory, warm your insides, but out here, stoves are a luxury and hope stew is rarely on the menu. Some guys get creative, add pepper, mix in contraband bacon bits, or eat it with bread if they have any. Most of the time, though, it's just stew, bland, stubborn, and quietly judging you for expecting more. You finish the last bite and wipe your spoon on your sleeve. A tiny fly buzzes past, pauses on the lid, then quickly flies away like it has standards. In that moment of silence, you think of your mother's stew back home. Tender meat, sweet potatoes. The smell filled every corner of the kitchen. She'd add a splash of wine and hum some tune from the 1880s. You smile, because memories don't need reheating to feel warm. A distant boom interrupts your thoughts. Not too close, not too far. Just enough to bring you back. You gather your tin, spoon, and what's left of your resolve and stuff them into your pack. As you rise, a younger soldier fumbles with his first ever can. You walk over and pat him on the back. "Don't worry," you say. "After 5 or 6 of these, you won't feel anything anymore." He looks at you, unsure whether to laugh or be horrified. But you know he'll get it. Because here, where mud is your blanket, shells your alarm clock, and hope is rationed like socks, a tin of makanochi, unloved as it is, still shows up on time. You wake up again, or rather, you open your eyes, because in the trenches, it's hard to tell the difference between sleeping and temporarily not being shelled. Your neck is stiff and your limbs are so cold that one wrong touch might shatter them like brittle biscuits. This reminds you of biscuits. You reach into your kit, and there it is. Loyal, ice-cold, and quietly menacing, the hardtack biscuit. The official breakfast of soldiers, a slab so solid that dropping it from waist height could result in one of two things: a loud thud or a small crater. It's called hardtack, which sounds more like the stage name of a retired bare-knuckle boxer. In essence, it's flour, water, and a prayer. Baked into a brick and shipped by the thousands to troops from Britain, France, all the way to the front lines, you pick it up. It's heavy, square, pocked with little holes, possibly to give the illusion that it once resembled food. Some joke it's a byproduct of the construction industry, an accidental batch of edible bricks. And after biting a corner, you can't argue. You bite. Nothing breaks, nothing cracks, only your teeth protest. Plan B, soak it in leftover lukewarm tea. 1 minute, 2, 5, no visible change. The biscuit remains solid, just slightly damp like a pebble left out in the rain. An older soldier notices and shakes his head. "Nah, kid, gotta crack it first." He pulls a small brick from his pack, sets the biscuit on it, and gives it a gentle whack with the butt of his knife. Thud. It splits into 3 pieces. He shrugs. Morning ritual. Keeps the dental industry alive. You follow his lead. First whack, no result. Second, still nothing. Third, a rat scurries off from the corner, startled. You count that as progress. Eventually, you manage to gnaw off a corner. The taste? Exactly what you expected. None. No salt, no sugar, no scent. If anything, it's a hint of burlap sack and quartermaster armpit. And yet, strangely, you feel better. Maybe it's the simple act of chewing. Perhaps it's that even flavorless crumbs can calm your nerves after a long night curled up with an empty stomach. Or maybe it's the quiet assurance that the biscuit always shows up, no matter how hard, bland, or brick-like it is. In a place where nothing is guaranteed, not your survival past noon, not your rifle firing when you need it, knowing that tomorrow you'll get the same biscuit is a strange comfort. A younger soldier sitting nearby eyes his ration and mutters, "You could kill someone if you threw this." You nod, thoughtful. "Yeah, but only if you aim well." Miss, and it might ricochet and break your wrist. A small laugh ripples out, not loud, but enough to chip the morning chill. You pocket the leftover crumbs. Maybe later, during watch duty, you'll want something to chew on, or use as a makeshift pillow. Rumors speak of a version in the rear lines. Soft tack. Gentler, tastier, maybe with a touch of sugar. But you've never seen it. You don't expect to. In the trenches, dreaming is a luxury. Hardtack. That's reality, no sugarcoating. You stand, stretch, and your joints crackle like the biscuit you ate. It's still cold, mud still clings to your knees, the rifles are still loaded. But you've got something in your belly, even if it's just rock-hard crumbs. And for a morning like this, that's enough. Survival sometimes means chewing through something without losing a tooth. Afternoon drifts by as quietly as a congealed mudflat. A fine mist falls, not enough to soak your coat, but just enough to turn your spirit into overboiled potato mush. Wind whips through the trench, carrying the scent of old gunpowder and something else. Something particular. Very green. You take a breath and instantly regret it. That smell is unmistakable. Vegetable stew. A grey-green liquid simmered in a soot-blackened pot, served with a ladle and consumed with grim acceptance. You walk over to the field kitchen, a shallow pit with 2 bricks and 1 tragic pot balanced in between. A young soldier stirs it with a scorched wooden spoon. He raises an eyebrow. Want a scoop? There's turnip today. You peer into the pot. Life has given up in there. Chunks, once cabbage, carrots, turnips, or some vegetable cousin, drift around like passengers who missed the last boat out. You take a ladleful into your tin cup. The colour, best not discussed. The taste? You already know. Very vegetable, in a way no one ever wished for. You sit in a quiet corner and take a bite. First scoop, potato. Soft, fluffy, flavourless. Second, carrot, except not orange, not sweet, not crisp. Barely a carrot at all. Third scoop, you don't know. And frankly, you don't want to. Rumour has it that the cook used to work at a hotel in Manchester. But since the war began, his ingredients are root vegetables and silent suffering. Each day he mixes whatever's left, boils it, seasons with salt if available, or with prayer if not. Once, someone brought in a bag of spices, could have been pepper or fireplace ash. After adding it, the stew turned dark brown and smelled like burnt leather boots. Lesson learned, never again. But nothing is worse than cabbage. Overcooked, it ceases to be a vegetable. It becomes the memory of one, melting into a gloopy sadness that leaves behind an aftertaste of regret. Add onion to that, and it's no longer soup. It's an attack on your entire nasal system. You sip another spoonful. It doesn't make you gag, but it doesn't bring joy. It's a strange, neutral taste, like someone politely saying, "I'm fine," while screaming internally, "I want meat." Next to you, a fellow soldier finishes his bowl quickly. You ask, "You like it?" He shrugs. Number, "But if I eat slow, I'll start thinking about it. If I eat fast, it only hurts once." Some days the pot has beans, or barley, or in rare moments of divine generosity, a sliver of sausage, cut into 8. Whoever finds it is declared the day's lucky man and granted the honor of retelling the story repeatedly. You're not lucky today, just cabbage, turnip, and something chewy that might once have been packaging. You sigh and stare into your nearly empty tin. Your stomach isn't full, but your heart is, full of empathy. For the soup, overcooked, overworked, and avoided by everyone unless necessary. In the distance, a few shells pop. Guards rotate shifts. A group of fresh recruits walks past, holding spoons like they're off to a banquet. You spot a young private, maybe 18, grimacing at his bowl. You lean over with a grin. Don't worry, 1 bowl a day for about 3 weeks, and your taste buds give up. Then it won't seem so bad. He frowns. What about after 3 months? You nod solemnly. After 3 months, you'll miss it when you're home. He chuckles, half believing, half not. But you know it's true. there's something strange about soldiers. No matter how awful, trench food eventually brands itself into memory like a badge of survival. You stand up, wipe your tin with your sleeve, and return to your post. Your stomach's still a bit empty, but your mouth carries the lingering aftertaste of burned cabbage and lukewarm hope. Evening settles over the trenches like a heavy blanket. There's no rain, but the sky makes no promises either. The wind is strong enough to rustle dead leaves from a tree that's been lifeless since last season, and the dust quietly clings to your uniform, a reminder that nothing here is fresh. You sit with your back against the dirt wall, fingers toying with a small box tucked inside your chest pocket. It's not hot food, not biscuits. It's what everyone calls the iron ration, emergency provisions. The name is as hard as the box itself. This ratio isn't meant for everyday use. It's not for snacking. It's reserved for when there's nothing else. When the field kitchen's been shelled, supplies haven't arrived, or you've been stuck in the trench for 2 days straight under non-stop bombardment. When the world turns its back, this little box stays with you. You crack it open. Inside is a pale grey block of compressed meat. Possibly beef, possibly mystery, held together by salt and hope. Besides, there are a few hard-tack biscuits, just as rock-solid as the ones from breakfast, but smaller because you don't need a large quantity when you're starving. You need survival. There's also a tiny pouch of tea, a cube of concentrated soup base, and a single sugar lump wrapped in paper if you're fortunate. Just one, but sometimes that's the line between collapsing and standing up. You don't eat it. Not because you're not hungry, but because in your mind, this box is the last resort, your final fallback plan. It's like the safety belt in a car. Nobody wants to use it, but everyone's comforted knowing it's there. An older soldier nearby once told you, iron ration doesn't taste good, but it's the only food that knows how to wait. He kept his box untouched for 3 months, then one day he was wounded and trapped between the lines. That box saved his life. You asked, what did it taste like? He replied, like chewing on a promise. You glance back down at yours. Every item inside is wrapped tightly, neatly packed, like someone cared. Nothing fancy, nothing extra, just enough. Enough to make it through one more day. Some soldiers treat the iron ration as a gift. When a comrade faints from hunger, they share half a box. When someone's wounded and can't eat solids, the soup cube in warm water becomes medicine. And sometimes, just a single sugar lump pressed into someone's palm is enough to spark a rare, grateful smile. Not because it's delicious, but because it means someone remembered you. Once, you saw a young soldier open his iron ration during a night watch. He sat curled up, teeth chattering, eyes sunken. He unwrapped the tea bag, poured it into a cup of cold water, stirred and sipped quietly. You asked, why not wait for hot water? He said, it's not for drinking. It's to remember what home smells like. And you understood because you've done the same. The emergency ration isn't just food. It's memory in a box. It's preparation for the worst, and the reason to outlast it. It doesn't bring joy, but it buys time. Time to wait for help. Time to find a way back. Time to survive another night. You close the box, slip it back into your chest pocket, close to your heart. Not for warmth, but to remind yourself it's there. Always there. When everything else is gone, it will be the final answer. You stand up, raise your collar, and return to your post. In the distance, there's an engine sound. It could be supplies. Perhaps it's hope. And in your pocket, the little box lies still, quietly waiting. Not for despair, but for the day you've made it through. You've probably heard the saying, war is the mother of invention. In the trenches, it's rewritten as, hunger is the father of all reckless decisions. That afternoon, rations didn't arrive. The field kitchen had been shelled that morning. The poor cabbage soup pot lay flipped in the mud like some extinct creature. And you were starving. Not the hungry, where you daydream about stale biscuits. The kind where you look at a rat scurrying by and wonder how much meat it might have on it. That rat, named Bernard, had lived in your trench corner for 3 weeks. He was big, clever, and almost fearless. At some point, you figured that if the war went on another year, Bernard would be promoted to corporal. You looked at him. He looked back, the gaze of two weary creatures. You thought silently, "I don't want this, Bernard." But you know how it is. War. A fellow soldier whispered, "I heard over in France, some guys roasted a rat, skewered it on a stick, grilled over fire. Smelled pretty good." You looked up. "Did you eat it?" He scratched his head. "Nah." But the smell helped. Just then, there was a commotion from the edge of the trench. A group of soldiers returned, faces smeared with mud, but glowing with triumph. And on their shoulders was something that made every biscuit chewer freeze and look up. A pig. Not a rumor, not a joke. A real wild boar was taken down during patrol. Maybe it wandered from a nearby farm, or perhaps it was the last noble descendant of a forest dynasty. Either way, it had become tonight's feast's star guest. The order to share evenly went out at once. One man sharpened a knife, another started a fire. And you just sat there, watching the fat begin sizzling on the cast-iron pan, listening to the soft crackle and smiling. No one spoke much. They didn't have to. The smell said everything. Soon each soldier was given a piece. Just a small one, 2 fingers wide, but it was hot, it was real, and it was meat. You took a bite. Your teeth hit the crispy outer layer, then sank into soft, rich flesh, bursting with woodland flavor. Your eyes fluttered shut for a moment. Not from sleep, but from happiness. After finishing his first bite, one soldier quietly tucked the rest into his pocket. When asked why, he said, "I'm saving it for tomorrow. If I eat it all now, it'll vanish too fast." Another suggested, "What if we save the pork fat? Smear it on tomorrow's biscuits. Might help them go down." Nods all around. Strategy. That night, no one sang. No stories were told. They just sat there, arms over full bellies, like they'd just left a secret banquet. There was no music or wine, but there was fire, meat, and something warm that felt real. And for a little while, you stopped thinking about Bernard. Bernard, ever wise, had disappeared. Maybe he'd heard the sound of a sharpening knife and decided to take an early leave. You hoped so. After all, he had been your longest roommate since the war began. In the following days, the story of the roast pork night spread through the trenches like a living legend. Some added flourishes. The pig could talk, and once fought a German officer. You didn't correct them. In war, even good stories are as precious as good meals. Eventually, the regular rations returned. The Makanochi stew, the rock-hard biscuits, the cabbage soup. Everything went back to normal. But you didn't, because now you know something. Survival isn't just about enduring. Sometimes it's about seizing the roasted pork moment when it arrives. You wake up with a strange emptiness one day after the legendary pork feast. Not hunger exactly, more like a sense of loss. That feeling of leaving a delicious dream without remembering the details. You reach for your chest pocket. No more leftover fat, no piece of meat saved for later. Just the hardtack biscuits and a few soup tablets as hard as pebbles, staring back like consolation prizes from fate. You decide to make tea. Every morning starts with tea. Not because it's good, but because it's the only thing you can prepare without feeling like you're hurting yourself. You build a tiny fire using some damp wood scraps, bits of cloth, and whatever hope you still have left from yesterday. The smoke rises immediately, not the gentle kind from a countryside stove, but thick, black, choking smoke. War smoke. It wraps around your sleeves, sinks into your skin, and curls into your eyes and nose. And then it seeps into your food. You haven't even finished the tea before coughing fits take over. A nearby comrade chuckles. "This smoke is the main seasoning around here. Don't like it? Transfer to the rear." You don't argue, because it's true. Out here, everything tastes burnt. Not because of harmful ingredients, but because of circumstances. You remember earlier this week trying to heat a Makanochi stew. The fire was just getting started when the alarm rang. You fled, forgot to kill the flame. When you returned, the stew wasn't stew anymore. It was bubbling charcoal, smelling like a burned dream. You still ate it because the alternative was worse. Another time, the fire was too close to the trench edge. A gust of wind blew dirt straight into the pot. The cook shrugged. Call it mineral soup. You tried a spoonful. It tasted like seawater mixed with sand, but the salt came from someone's tears. You once tried to grill a strip of jerky, carefully turning it over a weak flame between two bricks. The result? Burnt outside, still cold inside. You ate it anyway. It tasted like a sock you'd hidden for 3 weeks without washing, and you honestly didn't care anymore. In the trenches, every meal came with a smoky aftertaste. It wasn't a mistake, it was destiny. The biscuits, scorched because they sat too close to the fire. The soup, tasted burnt because it had been reheated 3 times. Even the tea, it smelled like old shell casings because the tin was used to cook meat and soup, and sometimes wash socks. A young recruit once asked you, "Why does everything taste the same?" You smiled, because eventually all flavors pass through the same life. Once you found a packet of strange French seasoning, maybe fennel seeds, maybe shredded tinfoil. You sprinkled some into the soup. A faint aroma rose. The squad went silent. Someone sniffed and asked, "Did someone just take a bath?" You laughed, but something inside stung. Not because of the spice, but because you realized you couldn't even remember what clean smelled like. You looked at your hands. Black stains filled every crease, every joint. Smoke, dirt, time. No matter how many times you scrubbed, it never came off. That color was the burn mark of a month in the trenches, of failed meals, of time simmered over a low flame, and just enough hope to keep going. So, you eat another meal. Burnt soup, rock-hard biscuit, tea that tastes like rusted brass, but it still warms your stomach, because warmth doesn't always come from food, it comes from not eating alone. A comrade hands you something wrapped in old paper. You open it, a single sugar cube, probably from some forgotten ration tin. You place it on your tongue. The sweetness melts slowly, mingling with the lingering smoke in your throat. You close your eyes. Silence. And for a fleeting second you imagine, one day the soup won't taste burned. The tea won't carry the scent of kerosene. The biscuits won't require a hammer to eat. One day you'll sit in a warm kitchen, under a yellow lamp, steam rising from a pot, and the smell of stew filling the room. You don't know when, but you know one thing for sure, you'll wait. Because survival, sometimes, is just holding on to an unburnt dream. You used to think all trenches were the same, mud, cold, smoke, and emergency rations. But then one day you were ordered to take temporary shelter near an Allied unit, the French, and you discovered a shocking truth. Even in war, the French eat better than you. The first thing you noticed was the smell of sautéed onions. No joke. Sweet and fragrant, real onions drifted through the communication trench like someone was cooking in a little restaurant, not a smoke-filled swamp. You walked over, curious, and saw them gathered around a battered copper pot, cared for despite its dents. Inside was vegetable soup, carrots, celery, onions, and yes, actual bay leaves floating on top. A French soldier smiled and waved you over. "Camarade, veux-tu goûter?" You didn't understand much, but the word goûter sounded like taste. It was the most beautiful word you'd heard all week. You sat down. They handed you a piece of baguette, crisp on the outside, soft inside, not a brick. You bit into it. It crumbled perfectly. No gunpowder smell, no dust, no need for steel-plated molars. Then another soldier poured you a sip of wine. Not much, just a small amount from a tin flask. Sharp, warm, and oddly comforting. Wine, the kind your unit had only heard of in fairy tales, but here it was, part of the official ration. You looked around. It was still a trench, yes. But they laid their food out on sandbags covered in cloth, sitting in a circle. One man softly sang a French tune, and others clapped gently. It wasn't a celebration, but it was a moment with flavor. You wondered, how could they maintain such grace right during a war? And then you understood. It wasn't luxury, it was survival. An older French soldier named Henri said, "If we lose the habit of a proper meal, we forget who we are." Then he handed you a small jar of Dijon mustard. You hesitated. What do I eat this with? He smiled. With anything. It makes everything worth eating. You didn't argue, because honestly, just a bit of mustard on your usual dry meat changed everything. It almost felt like you were having lunch in Lyon, if Lyon were being shelled and had rats the size of cats. Of course, not every day was a cartoon feast for the French. They had hunger too. They ate dried beans, canned meat, and stale bread. But the difference was ritual. They lined up their bread. They sliced cheese with knives, not their bare hands. They poured water like it was wine, even if it came from a muddy well. You asked, "How do you keep all this going when war is exploding around you?" Henri answered, without blinking, "Because if we don't, the war wins." You fell silent. It was a simple answer, but hit like a rifle shot in the sky. Suddenly, you thought of home, where your mother always laid a tablecloth, even if dinner was just thin porridge, where your father always placed the chopsticks neatly, even if all you had was dried fish. And you realized, food is a part of dignity. As you left, Henri pressed a small cloth pouch into your hand. Inside was a slice of bread, a piece of hard cheese, and a clove of garlic. "For the days you need to feel human," he said. You smiled, nodded, and silently thanked him. Because now you knew, if you could hold on to a piece of bread like that, you might get through the days when mud and smoke were your only seasonings. There are days in the trenches that stretch out like a winter with no promise of spring. Everything repeats itself. Rain, mud, gunfire, and more rain. Even the sound of artillery starts to feel boring. Nothing changes except your hunger level and the number of holes in your coat. That morning, the rations hadn't arrived. Rumors were plenty, as always, but no biscuits. You'd chewed the last scrap yesterday, and all you had left of the tea were bitter dregs. Your stomach was empty, so was your mind. And for a fleeting moment you thought, if a stray bullet finds me today, it wouldn't be the worst thing. Then you heard it, the soft, crisp sound of paper tearing. A quiet sound, yet it rang out like music. You turned. The soldier beside you, Thomas from Yorkshire, was opening a can of fish, herring in oil, the rare kind that came only in special supply drops, the kind passed along more by glances than by words. Thomas glanced at you, said nothing. Just nod, then silently place half the tin in front of you. The fish oil shimmered on the edge of the can, glistening in the dim light like it was glowing in the mud. You didn't know what to say. Your mouth wanted to refuse, but your stomach had already guided your hand. You picked up the spoon, the shared spoon, of course, and scooped a small bite. The smell of fish rose into your nose, not overpowering, but comforting like a distant memory of a harbor from long ago. The first bite melted in your mouth, soft, perfectly salted, and full in a way that felt like an unspoken encouragement. You swallowed slowly, feeling your body wake up, bit by bit. Thomas didn't smile. He didn't wait for thanks. He continued eating his portion. The two of you sat there in silence, but both of you knew that half a can of fish said more than any speech ever could. In the trenches, friendship doesn't come easily. Not because people don't want it, but because you might lose them tomorrow. Here, camaraderie doesn't begin with stories. It starts with quiet offerings. A spoonful of tea, half a biscuit, a single peppermint saved from last spring. You remember another time, during a heavy rain. Your coat was soaked like a tropical storm, your feet freezing from torn boots. A soldier, his name was Desmond, saw you shivering and handed you his only dry sock. "It's fine," he said. "My left foot's less cold than the right." You didn't ask why, you just knew that night. You finally slept because of a dry sock and a warm heart. Another day, you saw a group of young soldiers huddled around a piece of chocolate. The last one. Instead of eating it, they broke it into 5 tiny crumbs and dropped them into hot water. They called it chocolate tea, sipping each drop like champagne in Paris. You watched and smiled to yourself. They weren't just drinking chocolate, they were drinking hope. And then, one day, you did the same. When rations came late and the fresh recruit beside you was chewing something you didn't dare identify, You quietly handed him your last soft biscuit. He looked at you, eyes watery. No thank you, just a nod. But you knew. That's how war fails to consume us. Not because the food is good, but because we still have each other. You looked back at Thomas. The tin was empty, but between you both sat a stillness, not of distance, but of brotherhood. No big words, no oaths, just half a can of fish, a grey morning, and two silhouettes sitting side by side in a forgotten corner of a burning world. You took a deep breath. The smoke was still in the air, but something inside you had softened. Not because you were full, but because you weren't alone. You used to think there were only two kinds of soldiers at war, those who shoot and those who get hit. But then you met him, the frontline cook, a man who carried no weapon, never stepped into the trenches, yet could make the entire platoon line up in sacred silence every time he stood beside the pot with his ladle. His name was Sullivan, middle-aged, beard like a bird's nest, hands the size of someone else's thighs, always smelled like burnt onions and motor oil. He didn't talk much, but when he did, it was usually something like, "Where's the damn pot? Did someone use it to collect rain again?" Or, "Who poured flour into my boots?" His field kitchen looked nothing like a real kitchen. It was an old mine cart, refitted with wooden wheels and covered with a tarp. His cooking tools included one big pot with a curved bottom, two ladles, one wooden, one aluminum, three dented tins, and a shovel, which was sometimes used to stir the soup and sometimes to chase off rats. Every morning he woke up before everyone else, trudged through the mud to the supply depot, and hauled back sacks of beans, wilted greens, and cans of meat so faded no one could tell if they were from this year or last. Then he cooked, in rain, in wind, in the middle of artillery fire. Whenever, wherever. If the fire wouldn't light, he used oil. No oil, he burned rope. No rope. He stared straight at a smoking sentry and said, "Got a lot of free time, huh?" You once asked him, "Why don't you request a transfer to the rear?" He laughed, spat a garlic peel and said, "Who needs me back there?" But here I save a bunch of stomachs from turning to stone every day. And he was right. His food wasn't good, but it was there. And in war, consistency is a luxury. Rain or shelling, you always knew. When mealtime came, he'd be there, ladle in hand, scowling, muttering, "Don't complain. Eat. Still breathing. Then you're lucky." Once you saw him scraping rust from a pot with a wooden spoon. When you asked if he needed help, he handed you a dry onion. "Peel this, properly, not like yesterday. If it doesn't make you cry, it ain't a real onion." You peeled, just as he said. Tears welled up. He nodded, satisfied. "Good. Now toss it in. Let the pot feel something today." You didn't understand, but you did it anyway. And somehow, that day, the soup did smell better. Another time, he made something strange. Fried potatoes with dried fish and mustard. When someone asked what the dish was called, he said, "It's called whatever's left." But you remember it well. That day, the entire platoon laughed more. Maybe the food was good. Perhaps it was too spicy. Or maybe, for once, the meal made people talk to each other again. Then there was the day his kitchen cart got hit by shrapnel. No one was hurt, but the pot lid was gone. He said nothing, just grabbed a plank from the sandbag wall, hammered it flat, placed it over the pot, and weighed it down with a rock. Done. Anti-shrapnel kitchen 2.0. You asked, "Aren't you worried about dust?" He replied, "Dust is seasoning. Every spoonful has a bit of the battlefield." That line made you laugh until dinner and made you realize maybe he wasn't just cooking food. He was cooking life. With bruised greens, canned meat, and wrinkled onions, he crafted meals that kept a platoon from falling apart from cold, fear, and homesickness. While you were on watch that night, you saw his silhouette by the fire, alone, stirring porridge. The flames burned gold, smoke rising in waves, and he was hunched over, hand never stopping. And you thought, that man isn't just a cook, he's a soldier. But his weapons are a ladle, a pot, and a tireless heart. You used to think war was all about guns, bullets, rations, and falling bombs. But after just a week in the trenches, you discovered a truth more shocking than a missing ration delivery. Clean water wasn't a given. Not because there wasn't any water. The rain was constant, mud was infinite, puddles surrounded every sleeping hole and could be classified by color, from earthy brown to tea-stained to suspicious. But what you needed was drinkable water. And in the trenches, that was as rare as a dry bed. That morning, you woke up with a throat as dry as sandpaper. Your mouth tasted like you'd eaten a week's worth of dry mustard rations. You pulled out your canteen. Empty. Bone dry. No supply trucks had come the day before. The soldier beside you was trying to boil water in a rusty tin can over a few smouldering straw bits, staring into the flame like he was performing a rain dance. You asked, "Where do you get the water?" He pointed toward a puddle near the latrine. You nodded, not in agreement, more in the, "Yeah, I didn't plan to live forever anyway," way. You retreated, determined to find another option. Eventually, you gathered a bit of rainwater that had pooled in an upturned helmet someone had left out overnight. You boiled it. It bubbled up with a scent of plastic, old fabric, and something unfamiliar, but you drank it anyway. The first sip down your throat felt like swallowing someone else's memories and the water. An older soldier named O'Malley saw you and chuckled. "I used to be picky too," he said. "Now, I'd drink footwash water, as long as it's boiled first." Then he pulled out a small grey tablet, a purification tablet. Each soldier got exactly one. He dropped it into a murky tin, stirred, and 5 minutes later the water turned a weak shade of tea. You looked at him like he was some battlefield alchemist. He shrugged. "The only thing still working in this war is my kidneys. I plan to keep it that way." Once, the unit received a shipment of water barrels. Cheers erupted until someone noticed it smelled like kerosene. Turned out the barrels had previously carried fuel. A sergeant took a sniff, grimaced, then drank anyway. "So what if it's diesel-flavored? Might clear the dust out of my throat." You drank rainwater, water strained through dirty cloth or melted snow. One time, Cook Sullivan boiled water in a shovel. "Steel holds heat well," he said. Then he served it to you from a kettle that had once held soup, and at least once a rag. You didn't ask. In the trenches, water wasn't judged by purity, but by whether it kept you alive. You once saw a French soldier scooping water from a spot you were certain a rat had just passed through. He sprinkled a bit of salt, squeezed a piece of dried lemon from his pocket, shook it up and drank like a cocktail in a Paris bar. You asked, "Aren't you worried?" He replied calmly, "Clean water is an idea. Thirst is real." That night, you collected a little from a leaking gutter. You boiled it and made tea. No sugar, no milk. But it was hot, and by trench standards, clean. You handed a tin cup to Thomas. He took a small sip, then exhaled. "Only thing left that still tastes decent." You smiled, nodded. In a world where everything tasted of smoke and every meal came with a side of soil, a single hot sip of water was suddenly the most incredible luxury. And that's when you realized surviving war didn't require much. Just a tin of hot water, a faint-flavored spoon of tea, and someone beside you, sharing the warmth of that one simple thing. The day dragged on like spreading mud. How many hours had passed? You didn't know. Your wristwatch died the week before from water damage. Ticking hands didn't measure time here, but by rotating shifts, distant shelling, and how many biscuits were left in your pocket. Then night fell completely. The sun fortress sank, giving way to a cold that pricked like tiny needles. You sat quietly in the trench, clutching your still damp cloak. No more duties, no more shooting. Just you. And a hungry stomach paired with a vague feeling you were still alive. That's when you thought of chocolate. Not as food, but as a reward. You rummaged through your bag. Beneath a damp cloth, mixed with a handkerchief, an aluminum spoon, and some crumpled notes. Your fingers found something thin, square, and softer than usual, a small bar of chocolate. The kind rationed out occasionally, or sometimes not, unless you traded 2 biscuits and a promise. You pulled it from its wrapper like opening a love letter. The brown paper, the faded print, in the dim yellow flashlight glow, was the most beautiful thing you'd seen all week. You didn't eat it right away. You looked, sniffed, and smiled, in a place where everything tasted of salt and smoke, and the only sounds were the moans of the earth. A bar of chocolate was a silent song for the soul. You broke off a small piece. It melted instantly on your tongue. The sweetness rushed in, not sharp, not intense, but smooth, like an unexpected hug. You closed your eyes, leaned against the trench wall, helmet behind your head, and let the flavor soften every rough edge inside you. Next to you, Thomas lit a cigarette. He said nothing. You didn't ask. On the battlefield, a cigarette was the quietest kind of comfort. Every soldier had a way of rewarding themselves at the end of the day. Some saved a sugar cube. Others hoarded half a tin of meat. Some kept nothing but a cigarette, something that burned fast, but bright enough to light up a weary evening. Thomas exhaled slowly. The smoke drifted, thin, smelling of old tobacco with a hint of vanilla and, more than anything, peace. He held out the pack to you. You shook your head. "I'm saving it for you," he said, "for a day worse than this one." You smiled, not wide, but enough to warm something inside. Another soldier, you didn't remember his name, just his deep voice, and maybe he was from Wales, once said he'd kept a peppermint in his jacket pocket for 4 weeks. Every night he took it out to look at it, to smell it, then tucked it back in. "I don't need to eat it," he said, "just need to know it's there." One day he got lightly wounded and was pulled to the rear line for the night. The guard gave him some soup and half a slice of bread. He thanked him, then, with grand ceremony, unwrapped the mint and placed it on his tongue. "I figured today earned it," he said. You heard that story from Thomas, told like a dusty melody playing in his mind. You understood immediately. You'd once saved a sugar cube for 3 days for, you didn't know, maybe your birthday, perhaps the end of the war. Possibly to believe something sweet could survive without breaking under shell fire. Some smoke to remember home, some eat chocolate to feel human. And you, sitting in a pitch-black trench with a candy wrapper in your hand, realized these little things were the measurement of hope. And hope didn't come from a president's speech or frontline updates. It came from keeping something for yourself. You broke the last piece, ate slowly, chewed mindfully, as if folding the whole day into one corner of your mouth. Far off, an engine rumbled. Maybe a supply truck, maybe not. You didn't care anymore. Everything was quiet now for the moment. Thomas stubbed out his cigarette in an empty tin. He looked over. "Think we'll get rations tomorrow?" You shrugged. "Hopefully. If not, I've still got salt. And a chocolate dream." You both chuckled softly. The night had deepened. The cold remained. But inside it felt a little warmer. You never thought you'd be eating lunch half lying down, half tucked under a plank of wood, spoon in hand. Ears straining to distinguish whether that recent boom was distant artillery or just the stomach growl of the guy next to you. But that was the situation you found yourself in. On a day of the week you'd long since stopped counting. The morning had started quietly. The sky was grey, not raining, damp enough to be annoying, but not enough to melt the mud. A runner brought some fresh rations, biscuits, salted meat, cold soup, and 2 tea bags. You looked at the food like you were looking back on your life. Nothing new, but enough to keep going. You and Thomas sat in a corner of the trench, the safest of the dangerous spots, and began to split the meal. Thomas pulled out a bent spoon from his pocket. You found an old tin can to use as a bowl. The feast began. You'd just managed a spoonful of soup when boom! Not far. Dirt flew up like muddy fireworks. A soft tremor rippled through the trench walls. You and Thomas ducked instinctively. The soup spilled onto your hand. It was hot, but edible. "Right on time today," Thomas said, wiping his brow and biting into a biscuit. You nodded, biting yours. The crunch was like a chicken bone snapping. Neither of you spoke, not out of fear, but because chewing required full attention. Another shell whistled through the air, closer this time. Dirt fell onto the lid you'd been using to keep the tea warm. You brushed it off and poured the last warm liquid into a tin. It tasted of smoke, dust, and a healthy dose of adrenaline. You reached out and retrieved half a biscuit you'd dropped during the previous blast, blew off the thin layer of mud and popped it into your mouth. That's when it hit you. Survival wasn't about dodging the shell. It was about continuing to eat while still on its way down. Beside you, Thomas had taken out a cigarette. His hands trembled as he tried to light it. "Mind giving me a hand?" he asked. You lit it for him. Then both of you sat in silence, sharing a warm sip of tea and a piece of dried sausage stricter than the moral code of your sergeant. A distant whiz, followed by a boom, close enough to remind you that you were still very much alive. You both pressed deeper into the trench wall. Thomas sighed. "That's the third time this week they've targeted my lunch." You chuckled. "Guess they've got a personal grudge against soup." The shelling paused for a moment. No one said a word. Not because there was nothing to say, but because you had a softer biscuit in your mouth. An unexpected delight. You chewed slowly, savoring the fleeting piece. Suddenly, footsteps. Another runner appeared and handed you a small cloth bundle. Inside was an apple. Fresh, with a stem. You and Thomas looked at each other, then at the apple like two kids seeing Christmas lights. You took the first half, sweet, cool, crisp, real crisp, not brick crisp. Thomas took the other half and closed his eyes like he was listening to classical music. "First thing I've eaten all month that doesn't taste like smoke," he murmured. You nodded, couldn't agree more. In the distance, another dull thud, fresh shell fire. But this time, you didn't move. You were still chewing. And sometimes, calmly chewing during an artillery barrage is the boldest declaration you can make. I'm alive, and I'm enjoying the only crunchy thing left in my life. You finished the meal in silence. No comments about the soup's flavor or the toughness of the biscuit. Just a glance between you two, like a silent pact. We eat like the explosions don't exist. You stood, packed your tin, and pocketed your spoon. A light rain began to fall, but inside you, the taste of a sweet apple, a crunchy biscuit, and a cigarette, not quite finished, still lingered. You smiled. Because in a place where every life hangs by a thread of smoke, even a meal, interrupted by artillery, can still be a quiet feast. The sky was gloomier than usual. The air felt as if someone had slowed it down, every second dragging like the mud clinging to your boots. You sat by the field kitchen, the pot lid slightly ajar, wisps of steam curling into your sleeves, the faint scent of vegetable stew drifting through the cold wind. The ration list was read aloud. The sergeant's voice was hoarse and gruff, as always. But then came one name, and no one answered. That name was McCleary. You turned your head. His usual spot, the left corner of the trench, the one with a sandbag with a small hole and just enough sky to see a slice of daylight, was empty. His spoon was still there, sticking straight out of a metal tin. The lid was still open, but he was gone. No one said a word. No one needed to. Everyone understood. McCleary was taken last night. One shell, one sudden blast, 1 second too slow to duck. And just like that, his dinner was never finished. You slowly walked to the place where he used to sit. You looked at the tin can with half his stew still inside, now cold. On the rim, a smudge of dried mud, maybe from his hand as he was reaching for it before. You couldn't finish the thought. Thomas approached, holding a broken biscuit. Without a word, he split it in half and placed one piece next to McCleary's spoon. No one gave the order. No one discussed it. But everyone stopped eating for a minute. 1 minute of silence. No trumpet, no flag. Just a piece of dry biscuit and a spoon resting quietly, bearing witness to absence. He always hated vegetable stew, Thomas whispered, always added extra salt and said, "So it remembers who I am." You smiled, nodding. That was McCleary, always grumbling, always asking for more pepper, but never missed a meal. He always ate with the rest of you, hungry or not, cold or not, even when shells were falling. Once he got his hands on a slice of cheese from a French soldier, hid it like treasure in his pack for 3 days, then finally cut it into even pieces for the whole squad. "'Cause if I eat alone," he said, "I'll dream of ghosts." He laughed loudly, but his eyes were wet. You looked at his tin cup. No one cleared it. No one could, because removing it would mean admitting he was gone. His portion was still prepared that afternoon when rations were handed out. 1 tin of stew, 1 piece of biscuit, 1 tiny tea packet, and, as always, 1 sugar cube. The quartermaster quietly placed it where he used to sit. No one took it. No one dared. Everyone just looked at it the way you look at a hand that's been left behind. That night you were on watch duty. The sky was pitch black, rain falling in a steady, quiet rhythm. As you stood there, hands shaking from the cold, you remembered. McCleary used to take this shift, said, "Nights are quieter, less shells. Plus, I get to see the sky." You chuckled in your throat, romantic in a war sort of way. You instinctively reached into your pocket and pulled out your last piece of biscuit. You broke it in half, 1 half into your mouth, the other you slipped into the pocket of McCleary's coat, still hanging in the shelter. No one asked you to, but something made you do it. Like part of him was still there, and maybe, just maybe, a crumb would remind him he hadn't been forgotten. The next morning, rations resumed. For the first time, McCleary's name was skipped. No one said a thing, but everyone understood. The spoon no longer had an owner. A young soldier asked you while sipping tea, "Do you think McCleary got to eat his last meal?" You paused, thought a moment, then shook your head. "I don't know, but someone remembers him." You looked around. Thomas was carefully patching a torn tea bag. Sullivan, the cook, was blowing into the fire with a pot lid. An old soldier lit a cigarette from a nearly spent candle. And right in the middle of it all, there was a small space, where the spoon still lay untouched, a quiet reminder that the ones we lose never truly leave. In the trench, where life is as fragile as smoke, where every meal could be the last, remembering someone threw a spoon, a biscuit, a half-eaten stew. It is the only way to keep them here. That morning began like any other, the sky tucked under a blanket of lead and the wind steady as if gently reminding you, winter isn't going anywhere. You opened your eyes, your collar was damp, your hands are cold, your back is sore from curling up on sandbags all night. But something in the air felt different. Not because there was no shelling, you were used to that. Not because there was no soup, that was never surprising. But a strange silence settled over the trench. A silence not of fear, but of waiting. You stood, stepped out of your sleeping nook, and saw Thomas carefully folding a crumpled piece of paper into the shape of a small star. He didn't say anything, just nodded, as if the morning greeting had been folded into that little star. You asked, "What day is it?" Thomas looked at you like you'd forgotten something obvious, then smiled. "Christmas." You paused. Christmas, December 25th, a day that once meant firelight, family dinner, warmth. And now, here you were, standing in a trench, your knuckles red and cold, staring at a pot of nameless soup. That morning, even Cook Sullivan did something unusual. He lit the fire earlier than usual, and you could swear. He cleaned the pot before using it. That was the first sign that today wasn't just any day. Rations were heavier. Each soldier got a handful of raisins, a piece of candy, and, most miraculously, a small slice of pudding, no bigger than your palm. Some said it came from home. Others whispered the rear lines scraped it together. You didn't care, because whatever its origin, it was a real cake. Thomas handed you half his slice. "I don't like sweets," he said. You didn't believe him, but you didn't refuse. In your mouth, the cake was soft, mildly sweet, with a faint touch of cinnamon and, something more challenging to name, the flavor of memory. A little while later, someone started humming. Not loudly, just the opening notes of Silent Night carried through the breeze. Someone else joined in, then another. The voices weren't trained and weren't in harmony. Some cracked from the cold, but they were honest. You joined too. Didn't matter if you knew the words, only that you sang with them. For one brief moment, the trench became a choir. No chapel, no candles. Just a few people, alive, beside each other, remembering the words to an old song. Then something unbelievable happened. From across the line, another voice. Also Silent Night, in German, software shaky but clear. No one moved, no one loaded rifles. Both sides just listened. Thomas whispered, "They know it's Christmas too." You nodded. Looked up, a snowflake drifted down, then another. The trench seemed to hold its breath. No one ordered a ceasefire, but no one fired a shot. Lunch that day was cooked more slowly. There were vegetables, a bit of meat, tricky but fragrant. Hot tea, honest tea, not burnt or gritty. Someone pulled out a small piece of cheese they'd hidden away all week. Everyone passed it around. They ate slowly. Careful, like each bite was the last they'd ever have. You kept the smallest piece of pudding, wrapped it in paper, tucked it into your coat, not for hunger, but for memory. A slice of sweetness on a day without gunfire, without screaming, without death. A quiet miracle. That night, you and Thomas shared a watch shift. He lit a cigarette. You poured the last of the tea. You both gazed out toward the other side, dark, silent. You thought, someone over there is just like me. Drinking tea, chewing raisins, humming the same lullaby about a silent night. Maybe, just tonight, no one will shoot anyone. You pulled your coat tighter, held the warm tin of tea. The cinnamon still lingered on your tongue, and something in your chest felt lighter, not because you were full, not because the war had ended, but because, for one day, everyone remembered they were still human. If you ever thought meals in war were just about tin cans, bland soup, and biscuits as hard as bricks, you were right. But there's another side few ever talk about, the art of creativity born from desperation. After enough days of chewing soup that tasted like potato rinse water and biscuits that could replace boot soles, the soldiers in the trenches discovered one vital truth. If you couldn't have good food, you could at least make it different. Every unit had one artist, not a painter, poet, or transformer. Someone who could turn three inedible things into something you could at least bite into without bleeding. In your platoon, that person was Jenkins. Jenkins has a wiry frame, hair like a bird's nest, and is always wearing a tattered scarf with the swagger of a head chef at the Ritz. He had one rule: never eat anything as it was meant to be eaten. As the whole unit quietly gnawed their morning biscuits one morning, Jenkins arrived with a tin of what he called steam-infused tea biscuits. The recipe: dunk the biscuit in tea until soft, mix with a pinch of salt, and let it sit under your helmet for 15 minutes. Eat it like pudding, he declared. The result? It was soft, moist, and smelled faintly of scalp. But everyone ate it and laughed. Another day he invented mustard soup deluxe. Drop a soup tablet into a tin, add water, a dash of mustard, and, for French-style presentation, stick 2 unlit cigarettes into the rim of the can. No one ate the cigarettes. But someone said, tastes less like foot water today. A resounding success by trench standards. You once tried your creation, slow-roasted biscuit crumble. Break the biscuit into shards, toast over coals for 1 minute, and sprinkle with sugar, if any was around. The result? Still hard, but it smelled different. A bit like burnt popcorn. And you were proud. It was yours. One time, you and Thomas hosted a dinner party. Each of you contributed something. You had biscuits. Thomas had a tea sachet that smelled vaguely floral. Jenkins brought half-melted chocolate. You created a dessert called victory pudding. Floral tea, soft biscuit dipped in, and a drizzle of warm chocolate. As you ate, you closed your eyes. Imagine being riverside at a cafe, listening to violin music in the air, and seeing a smiling server nearby. When you opened your eyes, Thomas scratched his nose, and Jenkins swatted flies with a pot lid. But the sweetness lingered in your mouth, and somehow, it was enough. Once, Jenkins came up with clay-roasted meat, just canned meat buried under hot ash, covered in mud to keep away rats, and then forgotten for 2 days. It smelled like rain on a mummy when he finally dug it out. But after reheating and sprinkling black pepper, secretly saved from a French ration, it became the closest thing to real meat the squad had tasted all month. Jenkins bowed. "Not good," he said, "but it has a finish." You asked, "What kind of finish?" He answered, deadpan, "Reminiscence." You laughed, half from humor, half from choking on your own emotion. The truth was, in those endless days, when every meal felt like déjà vu and the food blurred into something you might have chewed in a dream, these absurd inventions kept you sharp, not because they were tasty, but because they said something. You still had the power to create, to twist the monotonous into something vaguely yours. Thomas once said, "War is a stew with no seasoning." But every time I add something, a pinch of salt, a splash of tea, a few drops of imagination, I reclaim my taste buds, reclaim myself. And you believed that. That night, before bed, you crafted a new drink. A sugar cube dissolved in warm tea, a few drops of lemon from an old pouch. You called it memory soda. It didn't taste much different than regular tea. But somehow it made your chest feel light. You set the empty tin aside. Beside you, Thomas was snoring. Jenkins was scribbling a new recipe. Salted biscuit porridge, onto the back of a cigarette box. It was lightly raining, but inside you, something glowed, like a small fire stoked with mischief and invention in the middle of a muddy battlefield. That evening wasn't too cold. No rain, no explosions. Just a gentle breeze brushing past your dirt-matted hair, tangled with sweat and dust. You sat with your back against a sandbag wall, holding a warm tin cup, sipping thin tea. And then suddenly, you thought of your mother, not because the tea was good, but because there was something in it, a faint hint of chamomile, maybe a trace of sweetness at the back of your tongue, that pulled you straight back to the little kitchen where your mother made dinner. That wobbly table by the window, the crooked-lidded salt jar always slightly ajar, and the sunlight slanting through. You didn't want to remember, but you couldn't stop it. You remembered sitting there, legs swinging off the bench, the smell of rice rising from the pot. The soup she simmered for hours until the sweetness of the bones soaked into your soul. Your father sets his bowl down with a loud clack, then chuckling, "Nothing beats a home-cooked meal." You took another slow sip of tea. Mud clung to your boots, wet cloth clung to your back, and your rifle leaned against your shoulder. But in your mind, there was a steaming bowl of rice and a pair of worn chopsticks. Thomas was chewing on a biscuit, grimacing. You handed him a sugar packet you'd been saving. He looked surprised, then sprinkled it on top. One bite, and his eyes drifted. "When I was a kid," he said softly, "my mom made butter cookies. Crisp when hot, soft like pillows when cool. She never let me have too many, said to save them. But I always snuck the crumbs, couldn't let a single piece go to waste." You chuckled. "I used to sneak sour salted plums. Mom knew, but pretended not to." The two of you sat quietly after that. No need to say more, because in each soldier that night, a whole house had returned, summoned by a bite of biscuit and a sip of tea. Across the trench, Jenkins was writing a letter. On the yellowed paper, you glimpsed the shaky words. "Dinner was better than usual tonight. I think the cook found real vegetables. I'm still alive, still laughing, still missing home." You once heard about an old soldier who, at every mealtime, took out a photograph of his wife and placed it beside his plate. He never explained. Just ate quietly, occasionally nodding to the picture. Someone once asked, "Is that your wife?" He replied, "That's my dinner companion." Someone once said, "When you eat alone, you think of food. But in war, you think of home." And they were right. One time, you found a potato in a misdelivered ration crate. You didn't eat it immediately. You set it on a sandbag and stared at it like it was treasure. Because in your mind, that plain boiled potato could carry the scent of childhood. A wood fire stove. Your grandmother is peeling it by hand. Your father slurps the starchy broth and calls you our hungry little rascal. You remembered your last meal at home before enlisting. The house was quieter than usual. Your mother made your favorite dish, crispy fried fish, boiled greens, and a dipping sauce with red chili slices. You ate more than normal, not because you were hungry, but because you were afraid you wouldn't get to eat it again. And now, sitting in this trench, you realize those memories are intact, not dented like your helmet, not smudged like your coat, but vivid, rich, as if one deep breath could bring them back onto your tongue. You finished the last sip of tea. The tin was cold now, but something inside you had been warmed again. You murmured, "Tomorrow I'm mixing the tea with a bit of mustard." Thomas frowned. "Why?" You smiled. "No idea, but maybe it'll remind me of something." He nodded, serious. "As long as it doesn't remind you of that awful bean stew from last night." Both of you chuckled so you wouldn't wake Jenkins, who was cuddling his rifle like a pillow. The wind still blew, the night was still dark. But in the heart of that trench, a home-cooked meal had just been eaten through memory. No feast required, no fireplace needed, just a trace of flavor, and someone beside you. That was enough. There was an unspoken rule in the trenches: if you still had food, keep it. If you were starving, act accordingly. You once thought of yourself as principled: never steal, never touch what's not yours. But after 3 days surviving on weak tea and crumbled biscuits, your stomach started negotiating directly with your morals. And your morals, instead of protesting, just sighed, "Well, it's not really stealing if he hasn't eaten it yet." Right? That day, Thomas was sent out on an early patrol. Jenkins was scribbling love poems, Sullivan was busy stoking the fire, and they were standing next to Thomas's backpack. You opened the flap to check, and there it was, a tiny piece of cheese, wrapped in wax paper, tucked neatly in a corner of the bag, like it was hibernating. You glanced around. No one was watching. You pulled it out to sniff, only to sniff. The faint, rich smell rose, stinging your eyes. From emotion or the mold, you weren't sure. You brought it to your mouth and took the tiniest nibble. The creamy taste melted on your tongue like an unspoken apology to Thomas. You carefully put the rest back, folded the paper neatly, just as it was. Hours later, Thomas found it and muttered, "Weird. I thought it was bigger." You pretended not to hear. But inside you swore, just this once. And of course, like every vow made on an empty stomach, it didn't last. You weren't the only one. Everyone had their moments of weakness. Once, Jenkins borrowed the sergeant's tea ration, mixed it with stove ash to disguise the color, then placed the packet back in the same spot. The sergeant didn't notice until he brewed it and thought he'd lost his sense of taste. Another time, a young soldier named Alfie discovered a crate of unopened canned meat. Instead of reporting it, he took 1 can, then scribbled "quality check completed" on the lid in charcoal. When questioned, he said, "I wasn't stealing. I was protecting the platoon's health." You weren't sure whether to laugh or take notes. One freezing night, your biscuit snapped in half just from the cold. You woke mid-shift, so hungry you could have eaten a sock if someone sprinkled salt on it. You crept toward the medical kit. Rumor has it that medics sometimes get peppermint candies. The bag was heavy. You fumbled through the dark, felt something round, pulled it out. In the light you saw a bar of soap. You didn't bite it. But you nearly did, and from that night on, you felt weirdly proud that you could still tell the difference between candy and soap. In the end, these little thefts weren't about greed. They were about hunger. The kind of hunger where a broken biscuit had the emotional weight of a letter from home, where third brew tea was still kept for sipping later. And because everyone understood that, when someone's ration came up short, the usual response wasn't anger. It was a glance, a sigh, and a comment like Jenkins's. "Next time, divvy it up and eat it fast. Holding back only creates temptation." One rare time, the sergeant discovered that 2 cans of meat had gone missing from the supply tent. He called the whole platoon out. The silence was heavy. Then he said, "If someone needed it that badly, I'll give them extra tomorrow. But don't let someone else go hungry for your sake." No one spoke, but the next day Alfie quietly handed him a replacement can, without a word. The sergeant didn't ask questions, just nodded. And that evening, dinner was a little fuller than usual. Because here, everyone knew, hunger doesn't make you bad, hunger makes you human. You remembered the time you borrowed Thomas's cheese. The following week, you traded a good pair of socks for another piece. You wrapped it carefully and tucked it into his bag. Said nothing. That night at dinner, Thomas looked at you and smirked. Tastes less mysterious than the last one. You smiled, ashamed, and strangely warm inside. One strange thing about army rations is this: though they're made to feed soldiers, sometimes soldiers are the last ones who want to eat them. That morning, you received a fresh tin. The label was faded, but still clear enough to read the dreaded name every unit feared: beef and mashed potato composite. Sounds harmless, almost comforting. But you knew, everyone knew, this wasn't food, this was a psychological test. You popped the lid, a soft psst came out, like the can sighing with you. A smell rose, something between rusty metal, unwashed onions, and what could only be described as forgotten memories trapped in a coat pocket. Thomas winced. Jenkins took a complete step back and covered his nose. You scooped out a bit with your spoon. The texture was unsettling. Not quite liquid, not quite solid. It wobbled in a way soup should not wobble. The color, somewhere between grey and orange, as if beef had once visited the can but left due to creative differences. You took a bite. Your mouth immediately rebelled. It tasted like spiced clay with a faint aftertaste of wall primer. You chewed for a long time, mostly because your teeth couldn't tell if it was a solid or a suggestion. Finally, you swallowed and said to Thomas, "Well, it's not bad, if you're a brick." Thomas tried a spoonful, set it down, stared into the distance. I need a few minutes to reevaluate my life." Just then, a large rat, you knew him, his name was Bernard, ran past and sniffed the open can. He paused, sniffed again, his eyes lit up for a moment. Then he backed away, shook his head, left, didn't even touch it. You and Thomas exchanged a look. Even the rat passed. This was a turning point. Jenkins, ever the culinary daredevil, gave it a shot. He scooped a spoonful, paused, and ate it. 10 seconds later, he bowed his head and scribbled in his notebook, "Not worth losing a tooth." Another day, you were issued a tin labeled chicken-flavored curry. Hope flickered in your heart. Curry, something bold, spicy. You peeled it open, only to be met with a scent resembling old rubber gloves. The color was a deep, unnatural yellow. It glooped more than it poured. Stirring it made a soft blub-blub noise, like it was fighting back. You tasted it, then sat still. Your tongue lost the ability to distinguish salty from sweet. You looked at Jenkins. He shook his head solemnly. This curry was clearly made for the enemy. Some rations were so notorious that they became trench legends. Special Pâté had once made 3 men vomit while laughing hysterically. Ground meat composite number 3 had sent the company's dog digging for grass to eat instead. One time, someone found a can labeled artificial strawberry dessert. Inside was a pale pink gelatinous block, the texture of boiled pigskin. It tasted like salted pencil eraser. And yet, oddly enough, these dishes had a strange effect. They brought people together. You'll never forget the night the unit was given cabbage soup with black beans. Everyone sat in a circle. Each took a spoonful. They stared at each other. No words, just grimaces. Then suddenly, laughter. Not because it was good, but because it was so bad, there was no other possible response. Jenkins clapped you on the shoulder and said, "You know what? Bad or not, we eat it. But if we eat it and still laugh, it was worth it." And you believed him. Because those mystery meals, with their questionable smells, dubious textures, and misleading names, gave you stories to tell for life. Each awful bite was a moment of shared suffering. Each bizarre tin was a chance to connect. Each terrible taste became a memory worth keeping. Not for the flavor, but for the laughter that followed. You always thought the other side, the Germans, was just a place of gunfire, grenades, and cold-blooded men who ate rocks and drank steel. But one cloudy day, with your stomach grumbling louder than usual, you discovered a truth that was both infuriating and hilarious. The enemy ate better. That day, after a scattered round of shelling around the edge of the trench, your unit was sent out to inspect the open ground. You, Jenkins, and Thomas were on point. Smoke still rose from the earth, pockmarked with craters, muddy ground, and charred branches. Then you saw a backpack, half buried in mud, just inside the enemy's perimeter. Jenkins tugged it free. Out came a pristine tin, labelled with firm, blocky German letters, and a small wax paper-wrapped bundle. The three of you stared. You opened the tin. Inside, pressed slices of cured meat, soft and pink. The bundle? Dense black bread is perfectly intact, with no mould or crumbling. And underneath? A packet of Dijon mustard. Thomas gaped. This is German rations. You nodded, couldn't answer. Your mouth was full of ham. It was good. Not rubbery, not saltier than a sailor's tears. It had a smoky aroma, a hint of pepper, and something rarer than rations usually offer: dignity. You took a bite of bread, dabbed on the mustard. Your eyes watered a bit, not from the spice, but sheer emotion. Jenkins groaned. I've been gnawing trench bricks for 6 months. And they get this? You didn't respond. You were too busy chewing and quietly questioning whether your unit had been getting the wrong supplies. The three of you sat down in the soggy grass like lucky thieves. No one mentioned the enemy. No one mentioned the war. Just the bread, the ham, and the mustard, spicy, fragrant, and strangely nostalgic for a culture that clearly understood lunch. Jenkins mused, imagine if both sides just swapped rations. Peace might come faster. Thomas nodded. Yeah, hard to shoot someone who gave you half their sandwich. You chuckled, not loud, but enough to take the bitterness out of your throat. Later, you found a small chocolate bar at the bottom of the bag, silver-wrapped, unopened. You split it into 3, and the 3 of you ate like cafe-goers in Berlin for a few minutes. No bombs, no bullets, just quiet chewing and silent nods of approval. That night, back in the trench, you told Sullivan. He shook his head. I've heard rumors, daily rations, real bread, lard, even real coffee, but I thought it was just talk. You replied, no, it's real, and so good I almost felt guilty. He burst out laughing. Guilty, huh? 2 more days of that, and you'll defect to the culinary corps. Since then, the squad has often called that day the enemy's banquet. Whenever the soup got too watery or the biscuits too green, someone would sigh, wish we had a bit of that German mustard. You kept a little in your pocket, not to eat, to smell. On days when the food was especially grim, it reminded you that meals could still be kind, even if the world weren't. An officer passed through once. You never mentioned the meal, because you knew, if he found out, you'd probably write a full report on unauthorized sandwich consumption. But you didn't regret it. Because in that brief moment, surrounded by scorched earth and gunpowder air, you weren't a soldier, not a target, just a human, enjoying a piece of bread from the other side of the war. You quickly learn one thing in the trenches. The food is awful, but the jokes are delicious. And sometimes, laughter is the only thing that helps you swallow a biscuit as tough as an old book cover. That morning, Sullivan handed out a special meal, dry bread and improved stew. The only improvement, as far as you could tell, was that it no longer smelled like anything. Or if it did, it smelled like suspicion. Jenkins, never one to miss an opportunity, held up the tin and declared, "Gentlemen, may I present prehistoric grey partay, aged 3 centuries in a munitions vault." The squad burst into laughter, even as their mouths worked overtime to chew whatever they ate. Thomas silently slid his broken biscuit tin toward you. The crumbs were crumbling further, but he nodded solemnly and said, "Behold, northern-style fried rice." You replied, "Great. I'll use my soup as fish sauce." Every meal became a tiny improv skit. No script, no director, but always a whole house and always perfectly timed laughter. Once Jenkins secretly drew smiley faces on every dry soup cube using charcoal. When the squad opened their rations, each cube was staring back. "I just wanted our food to show some emotion," he said. Another day, Sullivan handed out a new dish, thick porridge, thick enough that a spoon stood upright in it. Thomas stuck a note on the spoon's handle: National Nutrition Tower. You captured the moment in your mind because, well, no camera, and laughed so hard you choked on your tea. Laughter was the way soldiers made peace with hunger. The squad even invented an annual award, the Golden Grimace Spoon, given the worst dish of the week. The winner got to carry a wooden spoon painted with a frowny face, proudly hung on their backpack like a medal. Sullivan once earned it for his 3-layer smoke porridge. The top layer is raw, the middle layer is burnt, and the bottom layer is still under investigation. You remembered another time Jenkins switched the labels on 2 tins. One said beef in tomato sauce, the other canned fruit. After lunch, the squad sat silently, grimacing. Thomas tilted his head. "Why does this beef taste like peaches?" Jenkins smirked. Perhaps today's army chef was exploring fusion cuisine. The laughter was unanimous, everyone was annoyed, but no one was angry. In this place, being pranked with food was practically a love language. Someone even stuck fake eyes onto a biscuit and placed it at the center of the table, naming it Private Biscuit, Seer of Souls. Anytime someone tried to skip a meal, someone else would point to the biscuit and say, "You're being judged." You nearly dropped your tea once when Jenkins announced he was starting a mobile restaurant. It would serve 2 dishes, boiled water and boiled water with soup mix. Loyal customers would receive half a smoked cigarette as a bonus. The food was bad, but the mood was good. It's strange how people still found ways to laugh in a place like that. And that laugh, never loud, never long, it was just enough to warm something inside you. Sometimes you thought maybe it was the jokes that kept you going. Not because they were funny, but because they reminded you that you could still feel, that there were still people around you, and a little flavor was still left from the life before the trenches. That night, Thomas handed you a rare piece of chocolate. Before you could eat it, he warned, "Careful. This stuff's addictive. Tomorrow you'll dream about it and call me stingy." You smiled, bit into it. Not too sweet, but just enough to remind you life still had a taste. There's a strange superpower every soldier develops after too many days of chewing cold soup and shattered biscuits. It's not hunger resistance, it's not tolerance to cold, it's imagination. You're sitting in the trench, holding a dented spoon, staring at a can of soup with questionable ingredients. You scoop a bit, raise it to your mouth, and just as the scent of scorched ash and damp pepper wafts up, you close your eyes, and suddenly, you're in a restaurant. Not just any restaurant, a 5-star French bistro. Candlelight glimmers across crisp white tablecloths, polished silverware sparkles, and the waitstaff wear tuxedos. There's a long menu filled with names you've never pronounced correctly, but they sound fancy enough to make your hunger feel aristocratic. You imagine the server approaching, "Sir, tonight's starter is smoked lentil soup, accompanied by lightly charred hearth bread." You smile politely and nod, and as you chew your cold trench soup, you tell yourself, "Not bad, there's a finish to it." Thomas once said, "Every time I eat a biscuit as hard as stone, I pretend I'm at a wedding banquet." You asked, "Why a wedding?" He smiled, "Because it's the kind of place where everything tastes good, when someone's laughing beside you." You didn't answer, but from that day on, whenever you munched a dry biscuit, you imagined music in the background, the clink of glasses, someone asking if you'd like more wine. And you always said yes, even though in reality you were sipping tea brewed from a tea bag used 3 times already. Jenkins imagined differently. He said, "Whenever I eat something awful, I pretend I'm on a beach holiday. One bite of bean mush and I'm under a sun umbrella, staring at fried fish, crispy chips, and a frosted glass of cold beer." You asked, "And the spoiled fish smell in the beans doesn't ruin that dream?" He laughed, "Nope. Because in my head, I swapped that for garlic butter." Once you were gnawing a biscuit, dry, harsh, and dusty as usual, and suddenly in your mind, an ice cream truck pulled up outside your house. A chubby vendor handed you a vanilla cone with crunchy almonds. You were happily imagining that first lick when Thomas nudged your arm and made you bite your tongue. Goodbye, ice cream truck. But you weren't upset, because you knew it would come back tomorrow. A soldier once wrote in his diary, "I'm eating cold beans and pretending I'm at an Italian diner. There's red wine, a red and white checkered tablecloth, and a waitress, Maria, who always smiles when I mispronounce the specials." You thought, that's not just pretending, that's preserving a part of ourselves. When everything around you is mud, smoke, and screaming, a make-believe meal is a real kind of magic. Even Sullivan, the grumpy cook, wasn't immune to the daydreams. Once, while stirring a pot of gluey porridge, he announced, "Voilà, risotto with black mushrooms from Piedmont, enhanced with the scent of oakwood smoke, or possibly burning sandbags." Everyone laughed, then ate, and somehow it did taste a little better. You once saw Jenkins lift his soup spoon like a wine glass, hold it toward the firelight, and whisper, "Tonight's pairing is quite balanced." No one laughed at him, because we'd all done the same thing. War doesn't kill imagination, it just makes you use it more. Whenever you chew a biscuit that's too dry, you think of your mum's Sunday butter bread. Every time you sip cold soup, you hear a spoon tapping a family bowl back home. Every time you bite into something unnameable, you picture yourself at a cozy cafe, staring at a handwritten menu in purple ink. And so you chew a little slower. Close your eyes a little longer, because sometimes the meal in your mind, it is the only authentic meal you have. That afternoon, the air in the trench was so thick, it felt like even the sky was still chewing on the cold soup from morning. Cook Sullivan was coaxing the fire with a pot lid. Jenkins had peeled off his boot to dry his socks, and you were finishing the last biscuit of the day, hard as stone, crumbling like people's spirits under a grey sky. Then suddenly, a shout from the sergeant, "Mail call!" The whole squad lit up like someone had injected caffeine. Everyone sat up straighter, eyes gleaming, hands wiping mud from fingers to receive the envelopes clean. You jumped to your feet, heart thudding, not from nerves, but from that tiny, familiar hope that maybe, just maybe, today was your turn. And it was. The letter was neatly folded, the handwriting on the outside unmistakable, tilted, soft, your sister's. The envelope was slightly faded, a water stain streaked one edge, but it smelled strangely familiar. Not perfume. Home. You opened it with the care of someone unwrapping a birthday gift in peacetime. The paper was pale yellow, the ink a little smudged, but every word was still legible. "Hey, big brother, yesterday we grilled pork ribs, the honey-glazed ones. Dad marinated them all afternoon, and Mum scolded him for burning the oven. The whole neighborhood smelled it. I bet you're eating well over there too, right?" You couldn't help but laugh. The kind of laugh that bubbles up when you hear oil sizzling in a hot pan. The type that rises just from imagining the scent of garlic hitting butter in a warm kitchen. Jenkins, sitting beside you, tilted his head. "What dish is that?" You read the part about the ribs out loud, slowly, clearly, emphasizing words like honey, golden roasted, and fat sizzling. The trench fell utterly silent. No one interrupted. Everyone was listening with their stomachs. Thomas nodded, eyes distant. "I swear I just smelled smoke from the grill." Sullivan closed his eyes. "I can hear your dad flipping ribs with his old wooden tongs." A young soldier murmured, "My mum used to brush scallion oil on top after grilling." Hearing this, my mouth just filled with saliva. You kept reading. The letter was short but vivid. Each scrap of that home-cooked meal unfolded in your mind like a warm, colourful painting. Then Mom boiled mustard greens and poured the broth into a chili garlic fish sauce. Dad spooned it over his rice and said, "If we could send this to your brother, he'd ditch that army ration in a heartbeat." You lowered the letter. Someone sighed. No one spoke. Each man had drifted somewhere else. Not in the trench anymore, but back in their kitchens, at old dinner tables, beside loved ones ladling soup and smiling. "Here, have another bite." Then, like a ritual, Jenkins placed a pot lid over the heating soup and whispered, "Tonight we grill ribs, in our imagination." Thomas broke a biscuit in half, dipped it in his tea, and laid it on a scrap of tarp. "That's our boiled greens." You dropped half a sugar cube into your tea. "Let's call this fish sauce." Someone pulled out an unopened can of mystery meat, sliced it thin, and dabbed on some leftover mustard. Permission to present ribs. Might be beef, might be pork, might be something else entirely. The squad gathered around. The meal was, as always, simple, bland and cooling in the breeze. But everyone ate like it was something special. Each spoonful lifted came with an image from the letter: glowing coals, honey-charred edges, the joyous hiss of the pan, and the echo of a familiar voice calling, "Come eat, it's getting cold." That letter was read at least 5 times, and every time someone swore they smelled something different. Once it was lemon zest, another time fried shallots, another a memory no one knew they still had. That night you went to sleep with the letter folded neatly in the chest pocket of your coat. You lay on your side, helmet for a pillow, eyes half shut. Wind slipped through cracks. Somewhere a rat gnawed at sandbags, but inside you were surrounded by the scent of grilled meat, the warmth of a family meal, and one simple recurring line in your mind. Want another bite? Evening fell faster than usual. The sky turned to ash and wind slipped through the trench like a cold hand brushing your collar. You were pouring the last of the tea from your canteen, a weak brew that was more memory than flavor. Jenkins walked over and held out his hand. Trade you a sip for half a peppermint. You looked up. Peppermint? Rarer than gold. More tightly guarded than love letters. You took it, carefully unwrapped the foil and inhaled, crisp, cool, like the scent of night wind over a meadow after rain. Then you broke it in half, gave Jenkins his share. He frowned. I meant the whole thing's for you. You smiled. And I meant to share. He didn't argue. He bit into his half, eyes half closed like he was in a luxury cinema. Soft seats, no rats. The tea afterward, though bland, suddenly tasted just right, because it carried a minty aftertaste, and something else, a sense of kindness. Thomas rummaged through his pack, pulled out one last biscuit, whole, firm, not mouldy. He stared at it for a long moment, then broke it into 3 pieces. He handed one to you, one to Jenkins, and kept the last for himself. You held your peace in silence. No one said it, but everyone knew. Sharing food wasn't just about dividing rations. It was about lessening hunger and reminding each other that no one was forgotten. That morning, as always, Sullivan lit the fire early. Not because he had anything new to cook, but because he'd found a real onion. A red one, plump and whole, still in its skin. He roasted it gently over the pot, chopped it fine, and stirred it into the soup tins. When he handed you yours, he said, "There's an onion in it. Morale boost." You ate. It didn't taste wildly different, but something stung behind your eyes. Maybe the onion. Maybe something deeper. That night, a young soldier, Alfie, received a package from home. Inside, almond biscuits wrapped in crinkled foil. The tin was small, but it might as well have been a treasure chest. Every eye in the trench was drawn to it like moths to a lamp in fog. Alfie hesitated, then opened the lid, looked around and began, dividing them, one for each man. No one expected it. No one asked. But as he did, the entire dinner changed, became something close to a miracle. Jenkins held his biscuit like it was a sacred relic. Thomas sniffed his for 3 whole minutes before daring a bite. You nibbled yours slowly, like savoring a beautiful melody. In your mouth was butter, almond, and something you hadn't tasted in weeks, home. No one told Alfie to share, but when he did, it turned a cold trench into a moment of warmth. Jenkins whispered, "We just ate a real biscuit." Thomas chuckled, "And not one of those edible bricks." You said nothing. I just reached out and laid a hand gently on Alfie's shoulder, enough to say thank you. In the trench, where food was measured in grams and trust in glances, every act of generosity was a quiet declaration. Humanity still lived here. You caught Jenkins reading from a scrap of paper tucked in his coat once. Then he popped the sugar cube he'd saved all week into his mouth. You asked, "Letter from home?" He shook his head. "Number, it's a promise I wrote to my little sister. When I eat this sugar, it means everything's okay." You smiled and passed him what was left of your tea. That night, you lay down, head on your pack, fingers still holding the candy wrapper. And you realize something simple. In war, survival doesn't come from being strong. You survive because someone shared half a peppermint, a sip of tea, and a still warm biscuit. It was an unremarkable afternoon. Perhaps that's why it stood out. No wind, no shells, no whistles, no shouting. Just the sound of spoons scraping tin cups, porridge bubbling faintly in the pot, and Jenkins tapping the bottom of a biscuit tin, hoping to find a final crumb. You were on your third spoonful, the porridge so watery you could almost see your reflection in it, when a sharp hiss broke the stillness. Then a dull thud, close, less than 20 paces from the trench. Everyone froze. No shell, no grenade, just a stray bullet, a slight sound in the grey canvas of war, but enough to suspend your spoon mid-air. You looked up. Someone from the patrol hadn't returned. His name was Moran. New to the line, still had wonder in his eyes. Gave you half a candy this morning. Sullivan put down his spoon. No one gave the order, but everyone stopped eating. Jenkins quietly closed the lid on the porridge pot. Thomas whispered something no one quite heard, then gathered up his tin. You still held your spoon, but your hand wouldn't lift it. The food cooled, not because of the air, but because something heavier now hung in it. A young soldier walked past, helmet cradled in his arms. Inside were a few items, a pencil stub, a folded scrap of paper, and a spoon with porridge still clinging to it. Moran's last meal may have just begun, maybe still warm. No one spoke, no one cried, no one even looked at each other. An invisible emptiness opened between the places you once sat to eat. Suddenly, the act of eating felt extravagant. You remembered the first time you heard someone had fallen. The man to your left, the one who shared bread with you the week before, was struck by shrapnel. That night, despite hunger, you couldn't eat. You'd picked up a bite of meat, turned instinctively to tell him something, and then remembered. He wasn't there. Some meals aren't interrupted because the food runs out, but because the person you share it with does. Thomas once said, biscuits go dry faster when you eat them alone. You laughed back then, thought he was joking. But now, you understood. Today's biscuit, soft though it was, still caught in your throat. Jenkins, without a word, fetched a clean tin. He spooned Moran's leftover porridge into it, then placed it next to Moran's spoon atop the sandbags. No one asked him to do it, but somehow everyone felt lighter for it. That night, Sullivan didn't scrub the pot. He covered it and left it untouched, as if the porridge were still waiting. As if, even when war left no room for ceremony, we could still grieve with a bowl that stayed warm for someone who would never return. You went to bed with an empty stomach, not from hunger, but from a hollow ache inside. In your pocket, a piece of biscuit you'd saved for Moran, just for tomorrow. Now it rested there, silent. No one to hand it to. No one who'd need it. You looked up at the sky, a deep black stillness, and somewhere within you a whisper, "I'll eat your share, but I won't forget." That morning, Cook Sullivan handed out rations earlier than usual. Maybe the fire was lit early. Maybe. He knew there would be extra duties ahead. The sky was overcast, the ground soft, and the air smelled like a rainstorm still holding its breath. You held your tin of hot porridge in both hands, the scent of ginger and pepper rising gently, warming the bridge of your nose, a rare comfort in the soggy trench. You sat down, took out your spoon, and noticed something. Thomas's spot was still empty. He'd gone out with the morning patrol, and by now should have been back. But the meal had begun, and everyone was quietly pretending not to see that space. Without a word, Jenkins took a clean tin and filled it with porridge, just like every day. No one said anything, no one objected. He placed it exactly where Thomas always sat, to your left. You ate slowly, eyes drifting toward the steaming tin beside you. No one moved it. No one placed it near the fire to keep it warm. It sat untouched, as if holding a silent promise. Thomas will return. Some meals in war aren't meant to satisfy hunger. They're meant to hold space for someone not yet back. And strangely, despite the hunger, despite the rationing, Everyone treated that untouched bowl like something sacred. Sullivan once told you, in his last unit, a soldier named George went missing during a trench collapse. They never found him. But for 3 days, George's portion of every meal was laid out. Biscuits, tea, and a sugar cube for every meal. We didn't know if there was still a chance, he said, but saving his food meant we hadn't let go. You understood that, because now, as you looked at the porridge sitting in front of an empty seat, you weren't just thinking of Thomas. You were remembering all the times someone didn't make it back yet, and how people waited by simply not picking up a spoon. Another time, Jenkins set aside an unopened can of meat for the sergeant, who'd been stuck behind the line for days. He'd wipe the can clean each day and place it atop a dry sandbag. He hates congealed fat, Jenkins said. I'll open it warm when he's back. The sergeant did return. Fine, and that night they opened the can and ate together. It wasn't tastier, but it felt like home. Meals in war have no tablecloths, no toasts. But they do have empty places, held in hope. And sometimes that space is more nourishing than the food itself. You still remember that evening when the sun faded and the patrol finally returned. The last one through the trench line was Thomas, coat mud-soaked, eyes weary but alive. You didn't say a word, just pushed the warm tin toward him. He looked down, then looked at you. His eyes blurred, maybe from the smoke, maybe not. He picked up the spoon and took a bite slowly. Then exhaled, still spicy as always. You nodded and smiled. No one had touched that portion, not a drop had been taken, because everyone knew that was the meal that someone will never forget. In war, there are lies not meant to deceive or escape, but to keep hearts from falling apart. And nowhere is that more obvious than at mealtime. That morning, the platoon received a new ration, hardtack, bean soup, and a tin labelled only as main course unmarked. The label had faded, the lid was dented, but everyone was excited. Because in the trenches, anything unfamiliar carries the sacred label, might be good. You opened yours first. The smell rose, half fish, half burning rubber. You winced. But when Thomas sat down beside you, you smiled and said, "Tastes great, just like the stew my mum used to make." Thomas blinked, surprised. He opened his can, sniffed. His eyes fluttered like someone had just inhaled a steaming rag. But then he nodded and took a bite. Bold flavor. Could use a touch of pepper. You both knew it was a lie. And you both knew the other knew, but neither of you said a word. Because sometimes a gentle lie makes the meal go down easier. Jenkins played his part too. He took a tea bag used 3 times, poured boiling water over it, then raised the cup with flair. Ladies and gentlemen, today we present lightly smoked hazelnut tea with alpine herb undertones. Everyone laughed. Then I asked for a sip. Nobody believed it, but in that shared illusion, the tea somehow tasted better. Once, a young soldier named Dylan received a moldy ration. He quietly set it aside and stirred his cup of tea, trying to hide the slump in his shoulders. Jenkins noticed, walked over and handed him half a biscuit from his pack. "I've got too much today. Help me finish this, would you?" Dylan hesitated, then took it. He didn't thank him out loud, but he ate with brighter eyes. He knew Jenkins was lying, but he accepted it. Because sometimes letting someone pretend to be generous is the only way to save your pride. You once got a bowl of soup that was so lumpy that it looked like watered-down cement. You forced yourself to eat. But when Jenkins approached, you smiled quickly and said, "This one's good." Like the roasted rice porridge my mom used to make. He looked at you, said nothing. Then I took a spoonful, sat beside you, and quietly ate. Not because he believed you, but because he chose to think with you. Another night, Sullivan reheated the leftover porridge from lunch, adding a pinch of pepper and wilted green onions. As he handed you the bowl, he whispered, "Careful, it's hot. I warmed it over real wood this time. This dish is a specialty." You knew there'd been no wood. You knew the pot had just sat near the oil lamp, but you still smiled, took a sip and said, "Smells just like my mom's stove-cooked version." He nodded, like he'd completed a sacred task, and you took another spoonful, feeling strangely full. In war, hunger lives in the stomach, but also in the soul. And these small, harmless lies, like sugar dusted over dry bread, make things just a little less bitter. No one is fooled, but everyone chooses to believe. Because what needs to be swallowed isn't just the food, it's the belief that someone still cares. You remember one time Jenkins handed you a tiny piece of candy, saying, "I've got two. Take one." You took it, popped it in your mouth, then asked, "What about your other one?" He shrugged, grinned softly. "Must have dropped it somewhere, but I still remember the taste." You knew he only had one, and now it was yours. But you didn't apologize. You just sat there, chewing slowly, and made a quiet promise to find something to return the kindness tomorrow. The night before the big battle, the trench felt like a kitchen long after closing. Quiet, still, and full of something unspoken. No shouting, no jokes, just the gentle hiss of porridge as Sullivan stirred the pot, slow and careful, as if he were cooking for someone who mattered deeply. You sat among the usual group of soldiers. The fire is low, smoke curls into your hair, and something is different in the air. Not the smell of soup, but the scent of slowing down. Usually Jenkins would be the first to crack a joke. But tonight he silently scraped the lid of his tin. Thomas, sitting beside you, held his spoon without eating. In front of each man sat a portion of soup, thicker than usual. It seemed Sullivan had made it heartier tonight, maybe to fill more than just the stomach. You took a spoonful and brought it to your mouth. Pepper, dried onion, and a hint of chili. It burned, just enough to remind you. You could still feel. You ate slowly, not because the soup was hot, but because you wanted to stretch this moment. When the spoon was still in your hand, when the firelight still danced on familiar faces, when the whistle hadn't blown yet. Thomas whispered, "Remember the first thing we ate here?" You nodded. Cracked hardtack and bitter tea. "Yeah," he chuckled softly. "I hated it then. Now, it feels kinder than most things." Jenkins smiled faintly. "First thing I ate was French black bread. Not from our rations. I found it in a dropped backpack. Chewed it like I was sitting in a cafe in Paris. No one said anything about him eating enemy food. No one cared anymore, because now every story was just a way of clinging to whatever part of themselves they had left." Sullivan passed out sugar cubes. "Save these up," he said. "Might not be anyone left to want one tomorrow." No one laughed. You slipped the sugar into your pocket, didn't eat it, couldn't. You wanted to keep it, like a photograph, a poem, a promise you couldn't say out loud yet. Jenkins pulled out a scrap of paper, scribbled something onto it, then folded it and tucked it into his empty tea tin. You asked, "Letter to someone?" He shook his head. "To myself, in case I'm still here to read it." Thomas handed you a button. "From my old dress uniform," he said. "If something happens to me tomorrow, keep it for me." You held it, said nothing. Your hand felt cold. The button was warmer than you'd expected. The meal went on, slowly. No one rushed. No one gobbled down their food. It felt like everyone was eating for the last time, trying to memorize the taste. You looked around, faces streaked with mud, eyes tired, lips dry. But in the firelight, each one glowed faintly, like they were sitting in an old kitchen, a pot simmering on the stove. Their father is telling a story, their mother stirring broth and the warmth of something called home. You tilted back the last sip of tea. It wasn't hot anymore, but it was gently sweet, not from sugar, but because your fear had faded a little. After the meal, no one talked. Each man went to his bedroll, curling into jackets, clutching something small, a sugar cube, a folded note, a button, or the memory of the meal they'd just shared. You lie down, head on your backpack, eyes tracing the wet canvas above, and you whispered, not to anyone, just to yourself, "Tomorrow, if I live, I'll tell the story of tonight's supper. I'll say it wasn't delicious, but it was real, and I shared it with men I never wanted to leave behind." The sky hadn't fully brightened yet, but you knew. The battle was over, not because the guns had gone silent, But because the air carried the scent of iron, laughter was gone. With every step you took across the muddy ground, you saw footprints tangled like the unfinished paths of lives that hadn't found their endings. The platoon returned incomplete. No one needed to count. Everyone felt the empty spaces just by glancing around during breakfast. You sat down. A tin of porridge was handed to you. The rising steam blurred your vision slightly, but didn't warn you. The seat to your right, Thomas, was gone. On the other hand, Jenkins didn't return either. Sullivan, the cook, was stoking the fire, slower, quieter. He still handed out rations for those who weren't there, out of habit, out of ritual, as a way to keep their names present. You held your spoon, but didn't lift it right away. You stared into your porridge and saw a thinner, wearier version of yourself. Then you remembered, yesterday someone cracked a joke right over there. Someone recited poetry, poorly, right there. And you had laughed with your whole mouth. Today you ate in silence. A young soldier across from you, Alfie, pushed his biscuits toward you. "I'm full," he said. You didn't argue. He wasn't full. He was too heartbroken to eat. You took the biscuits and broke one in half, slipped one piece into your pocket, like always, and chewed the other slowly, as if each crunch was a quiet way to speak the names of those who were no longer here. Sullivan poured tea. He didn't say a word. But you noticed his hands trembling, not from the cold. You took a sip. It was weak, thin, warm in your throat, bitter in your chest. No one said the names, no one counted the missing. But when the meal ended, everyone knew. This had been a farewell. No funeral, no eulogy, just a spoon lifted but not swallowed. Just a glance to the side, then away. Just a piece of biscuit dropping silently into the mud. And perhaps, just one promise whispered in the heart, I won't forget the taste of today's soup, because it held the flavor of a final memory. Years later, you left the battlefield. No more steel helmets, no more coarse fabric or heavy boots. But there was one thing you still carried, a slightly dented old spoon, a trace of dried porridge on its handle, and a name faintly carved underneath. You didn't keep it to eat. You kept it to remember that once you ate with others, shared a sugar cube, a sip of tea, a gentle glance that asked nothing. Once you slurped spoonfuls of soup in the cold and thought, if I'm still sitting here tomorrow morning, that's enough. Once you set a soup tin beside an empty helmet, a silent promise that the one who left would not be forgotten. Perhaps war doesn't kill people with bombs and bullets. It kills them when no one remembers where they once sat to eat. But you remember. You still know the scent of fried shallots from old Sullivan's hand, Jenkins' quiet laugh when he sniffed German mustard, Thomas's little frown when the soup was too spicy, and Alfie's small hands splitting a candy in two. And now, every time you sit down to a simple meal, you close your eyes. The scent of hot broth rises, and just for a moment, you're back there, sitting among those who are no longer, eating with your heart and with your memory. The spoon in your hand weighs more than any medal, because it carries the meals no one talks about, the friends no one painted portraits of, and the promises whispered only into each spoonful of soup.